The reason I keep coming back to MK Ultra and its surrounding programs is because the more I research, the more I realize that we are living in the very product of that program today. The harder you look around, the more obvious it will become that the public wasn't told anything about the real aims and objectives of the CIA's, really they call it a mind control research program, but it was really just a control research program. Mind, behavior, individual, society, global. And when the revelations came out in the 70s, they dazzled the public with tales of Manchurian candidates and spy versus spy and Korean brainwashing techniques, and they purposefully flung all their dirty laundry around, salacious tales of prostitute halfway houses and LSD being administered to unwitting people just to see what would happen. But the whole revelation of the MK Ultra program is pretty much a joke. What the public was left with was all of the financial boilerplate subproject documents, which were given, by the way, to a former Foreign Service officer for the U.S. State Department to expose it all. Yeah, right. Okay? Oh, and the Rockefeller Commission in 1975, which is utterly laughable considering that A, the CIA director who signed off on MK Ultra officially in April 1953 was Allen Dulles, whose brother John Foster Dulles was a Rockefeller Foundation man for 16 years leading up to this? And just a few months after Allen Dulles signed off on it, Nelson Rockefeller was appointed as the first Undersecretary of the Health, Education, and Welfare Department, which was funding some of the MK Ultra subprojects, which were likely signed off on by Nelson himself, who was so timely put in place there. And C, the Rockefeller Foundation itself directly funded not only a lot of the research that went into the subprojects, and infamous MK Ultra researchers like Ewan Cameron, they set up his whole Allen Memorial Institute and everything. He's the guy that ran Subproject 68. But they also funded the decades of research leading up to MK Ultra. And they even admit, going all the way back to the founding of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research at the early part of the 1900s, they admit in their own documents that their aim was to, quote, unlock the secrets of human behavior in order to mitigate and even control humans' impulse to destruction, which is about as two-faced and backhanded of a statement as anyone like the Rockefeller Foundation can make. Like I said in my last video, it would take over 100 books and dozens upon dozens of documents to spell it all out for you in minute detail in something as simple as a YouTube video, but the technocratic, cybernetic New World Order that's unfolding all around us right now has always been about total world domination. And it connects to every other conspiracy you can possibly think of, and that very much includes Agenda 21. And when you really start to research just what's been declassified, just the information that's out there, when you read the documents yourselves and you start really looking through the books and the writings of some of these people, and you realize all of this, it's pretty clear that this is one of the biggest threats that we actually face today. Behind all the stuff they tell you in the media, behind all the other stuff that's going on that they flash in front of your face to distract you, this is a serious situation. You start to see how it all comes together. You realize it was no accident at all that Nelson Rockefeller got in as VP in December of 1974, after they pushed Nixon out, right before Nelson would then run the Commission on CIA Activities within the U.S., which has also become known as the Rockefeller Commission, which obviously mentioned, right, how much his family was culpable for the design and funding of the MK Ultra program. No, not at all. So, this is something so much bigger than the CIA trying to make Manchurian candidates. That being said, here are two things that always stuck out to me about the MK Ultra program that I think went widely overlooked and ignored by everyone, but that are hugely important. Neither of these things come from the boilerplate subproject documents, which it was later admitted in the testimony were indeed boilerplates, meaning they purposefully did not explain the true details and goals of the actual subprojects themselves. These things actually come from little snippets of testimony at the joint hearing before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence in August 1977. Note that at this hearing, they steered most of the conversation into things relating to drugs. And the reason that's so important is going to become apparent in a moment. So the first thing is Dr. Geschichter of the Geschichter Foundation for Medical Research, who acted as a cutout for CIA funds for the MKUltra program for almost 20 years, brought up a very important point in his testimony that caused Senator Ted Kennedy to almost immediately change the subject. In a passage where Geschichter is discussing NIH involvement, and the National Institutes of Health were very, very involved, he notes that part of what they were doing was purposefully causing amnesia with concussions, but then he says the other, which was funded through this later business, was the use of radar to put monkeys to sleep. To see if they could be, should I say, instead of Mickey Finn, they could be put under with radar directed toward the monkey brain. And Senator Schweiker says, could they? And Geschichter says, did they go to sleep? And Schweiker says, yes. And then Geschichter says, yes, sir, but Senator, it showed if you got into too deep a sleep, you injured the heat center of the brain the way you cook meat, and there was a borderline there that made it dangerous. And then immediately Senator Kennedy says, now there's a discussion in the memoranda as to how to hide contributions so no additional taxes would be paid by you. He completely changes the subject instantly. Geschichter just admitted that the CIA and the National Institutes of Health were doing studies using radar to put animals to sleep, and they never followed up on that. That is insane, and they never brought that up again. They never questioned him further on that. Kennedy changed the subject, which was his whole job as the front man of this ridiculous testimony here, and that was it. In fact, he was probably upset that it even got brought up. He probably didn't even realize that he was going there when he asked him about NIH involvement. But as soon as that was said, he changed the subject immediately. And again, Geschichter says he was involved in this program from late 1953, so the year it started, until 1972, which brings me to my second point. Mainstream sources always point out that MKUltra ended in 1964. And it's really unclear to me as to where they even got that year from, considering that in some of the sub-project documents, it's clearly shown that funding continued well beyond that year, not to mention some of the other projects under the MK umbrella, like MK Search, have never been declassified, and they weren't started till the mid-60s. And for other projects within the MKUltra program, after the initial goals were completed, the whole thing was then rolled into a new program based on those findings under other agencies. Things like DARPA's Project Pandora, which started in the mid-60s and involved, guess what? Beaming monkeys with radar. And not just to put them to sleep. But the findings of that and the effects on the central nervous system, those kinds of things, those are still classified to this day. And another big clue, I think, in this vein, also found in the testimony, comes from newly appointed CIA Director Admiral Stansfield Turner, who repeated, both in his written statement and in his live testimony, the line, I assure you that the CIA is in no way engaged in either witting or unwitting testing of drugs today. It might have been his entire job to show up at that testimony to make sure and say that line on record, which he did twice. And while there's no reason to believe anything he says anyways, there's no follow-up there. They made a big deal about the unwitting drug testing in the media. Turner says the drug testing is over, and everyone calls the whole thing case closed. No one ever followed up on the electromagnetic radiation experiments. And information regarding what certain extremely low frequencies did to monkeys in that Pandora project, like I said, still classified to this day. And every once in a little while, you'll see a tidbit of info come out. Things like this paper that came out in December 2013, which had to do with the Russian MKUltra twin program that was going on, where they talk about the biological effects of weak electromagnetic emissions and things like that. And in the paper itself, they note that in 1973, a Russian military unit 71592 established an installation radiosonde, which sounds a lot like radio sonde. They conducted pre-tests, and the positive results are reflected in the acts of tests of the military unit, and according to calculations in 1974, the generator radiosonde can effectively treat, quote-unquote, a city of 100 square kilometers, plunging the inhabitants into a deep sleep at a distance of up to 55 kilometers away from the transmitter. They could put whole towns of people to sleep in the mid-70s. Like, it's something straight out of the movie Dark City. And this right here is what no one talks about. When you ask someone about MKUltra, they'll talk about mind control like it's a conspiracy theory, it's not a real thing. And they'll talk about drugs and hypnosis and LSD and prostitute halfway houses and Manchurian candidates, right? Stuff like that. But that's because that's what we were told. Meanwhile, we're living in an MK'd world.